You remember silence before algorithms trained people to fear being alone forever. Most generations adapted to one world, then defended it like loyal citizens. You adapted to two collapsing realities simultaneously, which forced your mind into permanent observation mode. That psychological split became your hidden advantage and your private exhaustion. People call Xennials nostalgic because they misunderstand what actually happened. You are not mourning old technology. You are mourning the last era where human attention still belonged to humans instead of invisible systems, manipulating emotion, identity, and desire continuously. You watched intimacy become performance, confidence become branding, and loneliness become content. That experience changed your nervous system permanently because you still remember when conversations ended naturally instead of surviving forever inside digital archives and screenshots. Machiavelli understood that people eventually worship appearances more than truth. Xennials witnessed that transformation happen publicly, slowly, and brutally. You learned perception controls modern power because you watched authenticity lose against carefully engineered personalities online. Robert Greene often describes social life as strategic theater hidden beneath polite behavior. Xennials learned this instinctively because the internet exposed everyone's masks simultaneously, turning private insecurities into public currencies traded endlessly for validation and influence. Before social media measured human worth through numbers, you learned connection differently. Friendship required effort, patience, unpredictability, and emotional risk. That history makes modern interactions feel strangely empty because convenience removed the psychological depth people once earned naturally. Carl Jung believed ignored shadows eventually control human behavior unconsciously. Xennials developed sharper emotional awareness because you experienced both restrained analog culture and hyper-expressive digital culture colliding violently inside the same lifetime without warning or guidance. Freud argued, hidden drives shape human behavior more than conscious intentions. You recognize this online immediately. Platforms claiming to encourage connection were actually exploiting envy, insecurity, lust, and tribal belonging because those emotions generate predictable human obedience. This knowledge is not about manipulating innocent people or glorifying emotional coldness. Serious. It exists for awareness, self-protection, and strategic control. Understanding psychological dynamics helps you avoid becoming another exhausted mind consumed by systems designed to exploit attention. By the end, you will understand why your emotional distance became survival instead of weakness. You will recognize hidden patterns shaping modern behavior, reclaim psychological control, and stop apologizing for instincts society secretly trained into your generation. If this already feels painfully familiar, comment, "I remember the real world." Xennials became emotionally self-reliant because nobody prepared you for cultural acceleration. Older generations dismissed the internet, while younger generations normalized it immediately. You existed between confusion and adaptation, learning survival without emotional instructions from anyone trustworthy. That isolation created unusual psychological resilience. Alfred Adler believed inferiority often produces compensation through mastery and discipline. Xennials compensated by becoming adaptable observers, quietly studying social behavior because certainty disappeared faster than stability could emotionally process itself. You learned not to depend completely on institutions, trends, or public narratives. Every few years, society reinvented itself again. Careers changed, relationships changed, communication changed, and attention spans collapsed while people pretended constant reinvention represented healthy psychological progress. That instability trained you differently from younger generations raised entirely inside digital environments. You remember boredom, patience, anticipation, and privacy. Because you experienced slower living first, modern overstimulation feels invasive instead of normal or comforting. Erich Fromm warned that societies eventually confuse freedom with consumption and identity with ownership. Xennials watched this happen directly. Human beings stopped asking meaningful questions about character and started optimizing themselves endlessly for social approval and algorithmic relevance. That realization quietly damaged trust. You saw people become brands, friendships become networking opportunities, and vulnerability become strategic performance. Eventually, many Xennials stopped expecting emotional sincerity because modern environments reward attention more consistently than genuine human connection. This explains your social exhaustion. It is not simple introversion. You became psychologically tired from constantly filtering manipulation disguised as authenticity. Robert Cialdini described how persuasion exploits predictable emotional shortcuts and digital culture industrialized those mechanisms at terrifying scales. Scarcity became emotional warfare. Everyone demanded immediate responses, endless accessibility, and permanent availability. Xennials resisted instinctively because you still remember when disappearing temporarily was considered healthy instead of suspicious, disrespectful, or emotionally threatening toward other people. That resistance made you appear detached, but detachment often protects psychological clarity. Kevin Dutton observed that certain emotionally controlled traits help people remain functional during chaos. Xennials unconsciously developed those traits simply because cultural transformation never stopped pressuring their identity. You learned to observe before reacting, because reacting emotionally online usually creates permanent consequences. Younger generations adapted faster socially, but Xennials developed stronger internal filters because you remember, life before public opinion invaded every private emotional experience continuously. This created a strange contradiction. You understand internet culture deeply, yet part of you fundamentally distrusts it. You participate because modern survival requires participation, but psychologically, you never completely surrendered your identity to digital approval systems. That tension explains your dark humor. Humor became armor against cultural absurdity because laughing feels safer than admitting disappointment. Many Xennials secretly believe society traded depth for stimulation, then convinced itself constant stimulation represented meaningful progress and emotional evolution. Jordan Peterson often speaks about balancing order against chaos responsibly. Xennials lived through both extremes simultaneously. The structured analog world disappeared, while chaotic digital culture emerged rapidly, forcing your generation into constant psychological recalibration without stable emotional foundations. You became adaptable because rigidity would have destroyed you emotionally. Yet adaptation carries hidden costs. Constant adjustment teaches survival, but eventually survival becomes identity itself. Many Xennials struggle relaxing because hyper-awareness became necessary during years of relentless social transformation. Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams described how dark triad personalities exploit charm, manipulation, and emotional detachment strategically. Xennials recognized those traits earlier online because the internet rewarded narcissism publicly while disguising exploitation behind entertainment, influence, and curated relatability. You watched ordinary people transform completely after receiving attention online. validation changed personalities faster than trauma sometimes does. That observation permanently altered your understanding of human nature because it exposed how fragile identity becomes when external approval replaces internal stability. As a result, many Xennials stopped trusting appearances entirely. Compliments sounded strategic, confidence looked rehearsed, and kindness sometimes felt transactional. You became skilled at detecting emotional inconsistency because modern culture repeatedly rewarded performance over sincerity and accountability. That skill makes relationships harder now. You notice subtle manipulation immediately, but constantly analyzing motives creates emotional distance. Carl Jung warned that excessive awareness of darkness can isolate people psychologically because they eventually struggle believing innocence genuinely exists anymore. Still, your generation carries something powerful beneath the cynicism, hopeful. You remember human connection before constant comparison destroyed emotional presence. That memory gives you a psychological reference point younger generations never experienced, which makes your perspective unusually valuable during cultural confusion. You understand that attention is modern currency. Whoever controls attention shapes perception, behavior, and eventually reality itself. Machiavelli would recognize today's world instantly because influence now depends less on truth and more on emotional visibility inside crowded psychological marketplaces. Xennials adapted strategically by becoming selective with energy instead of endlessly available. You learned that every notification competes for mental space, emotional stability, and identity reinforcement. Protecting your attention became a survival mechanism, not selfishness or emotional withdrawal. Many people misunderstood this boundary setting as bitterness, but boundaries often emerge after repeated psychological exhaustion. Freud believed repetition reveals hidden, unresolved conflicts. Xennials repeated overstimulation long enough to realize modern life rewards accessibility while quietly punishing inner peace and reflection. That realization changed how you evaluate success. Older generations chased stability, while younger generations chase visibility. Xennials quietly crave psychological freedom because you witnessed how quickly public validation becomes emotional dependency when identity relies entirely upon external digital reinforcement. You became skeptical of trends because trends now replace genuine individuality. Everyone claims uniqueness while consuming identical opinions, aesthetics, and emotional reactions simultaneously. Watching this happen repeatedly trained Xennials into cautious observers rather than enthusiastic participants within collective social behavior. Robert Greene explains that powerful people rarely reveal complete intentions publicly. Xennials internalize this naturally because online culture normalized strategic self-presentation. You learn that everyone edits reality now, which means wisdom requires studying contradictions instead of trusting polished narratives blindly. This is why many Xennials feel disconnected from both older and younger generations simultaneously. Older generations underestimate technological influence, while younger generations often underestimate psychological consequences. You exist awkwardly between those perspectives, carrying insights neither side completely understands emotionally. That middle position feels lonely sometimes, yet loneliness sharpened your perception. Alfred Adler believed people often develop strengths directly from emotional disadvantages. Xennials developed pattern recognition because surviving cultural instability required noticing hidden shifts before they completely transformed daily life. You recognize how algorithms manipulate outrage because you remember when outrage spread slower naturally. You understand why relationships feel fragile because endless options weakened emotional investment. You noticed declining attention spans because you experienced concentration before perpetual digital fragmentation became normalized. Many Xennials secretly feel guilty for becoming emotionally detached, but detachment sometimes protects human dignity during manipulative environments. Constant exposure to artificial urgency eventually forces psychologically healthy people to withdraw selectively, simply to preserve independent thought and emotional balance. Kevin Dutton observed that controlled emotional distance can improve decision-making under pressure. Xennials accidentally developed this skill through adaptation. You learned remaining calm during chaos matters more than appearing emotionally expressive during environments designed specifically to provoke reactive behavior constantly. That does not mean becoming cold-hearted. It means understanding modern society rewards emotional impulsiveness because impulsive people are easier to influence, predict, and monetize. Strategic emotional control protects your autonomy in systems constantly competing for psychological ownership over your attention. You were never weak for feeling disconnected from modern culture. Serious. Your discomfort signals awareness. Erich Fromm warned societies can become psychologically unhealthy collectively, causing emotionally healthy individuals to feel alienated simply because they still recognize authentic human needs clearly. The tragedy is that many Xennials hide their exhaustion behind competence. You adapted so efficiently that people assume you handled transformation easily. They never saw the quiet identity crisis caused by witnessing reality itself become increasingly performative and psychologically fragmented. You learned to survive both human environments and algorithmic environments simultaneously. That dual awareness created emotional fatigue, but it also created uncommon strategic intelligence. You understand manipulation because you witnessed its evolution from subtle social pressure into automated psychological engineering systems. Remember this clearly. Firm, your skepticism was earned. Your emotional caution was learned through observation. Your desire for privacy, silence, and meaningful connection does not make you outdated. It makes you one of the last generations remembering psychological life before permanent digital exposure. You are no longer someone apologizing for needing distance from artificial chaos. You are someone recognizing how modern systems shape behavior deliberately, then choosing consciously which influences deserve access to your identity, emotional energy, attention, and inner psychological stability. If you still carry memories from the world before algorithms dominated human emotion, comment, "We adapted twice." Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone quietly exhausted by modern culture. Hopeful, Xennials do not crave attention desperately. They crave clarity, truth, emotional control, and relationships untouched by endless digital performance and psychological manipulation. The last generation raised before the algorithm still remembers what humanity felt like,